So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about a celebrity murder. I don't do celebrity murders that often, but today we're going to be talking about the murder of a popular rapper named Chinx Drugz from New York. You might have heard of his songs before. He was very successful. They all have millions of streams. He's worked with people like French Montana, Rick Ross, Jadakiss, Jeremiah, Young Thug, Nipsey Hussle, DJ Khaled, some big names, and Chinx himself was a big name. So if you guys enjoy this case and you want some more celebrity murder cases, comment them down below. I'm always looking for new case requests. Before I do start talking about that though, I just want to let you guys know that my merch has almost sold out. It's almost gone, and once it's gone, I don't know if it's going to be coming back. So if you want to go and get something, you can. It's ELEANORNEALE.SHOP. That's the link. The link will be down below in the description. Thank you so much if you have got any of my merch while it's been up. It's been received and supported by you guys so much better than I could have even imagined. So thank you so much. You've all been so kind about it. I'm so proud of it, and it's just done so well. And you know, I'm sad to see it go, but once it's sold out, it's sold out, and I'm working on my next design soon, so keep your eyes peeled. But yeah, if you want to go and grab any of the merch before it's sold out, the link is in the description. Anyway, before we get into this case, I just want to thank our sponsor for this video, Urbanista. Recently, I've switched out my old earphones for Urbanista's London wireless earphones, and when I tell you I'm never going back, the noise cancellation on these things is something that I have never experienced before with earphones. I've just never had earphones that are this good at getting rid of the rest of the world. But what drew me to these earphones specifically is that they don't have to be noise cancelling. They have their noise cancellation mode, but then if you want to be a bit more aware of your surroundings, maybe you're walking home or something, they have an ambient sound mode, which means you can kind of hear what's going on around you. And that was a game changer for me, because normally you either have to pick whether you want standard earphones or noise cancelling ones, and I don't always want noise cancelling ones, so I like that you can turn that off with these ones. The charging case holds 4 rounds of charge, giving you 25 hours of listening time. They're also water resistant and touch and voice controlled too, so you have the option of how you want to work them. The London earphones come in a range of 4 different colours inspired by the city of London. So you have midnight black, pearl white, which is what I chose because white goes with everything and I like white. They also do rose gold and dark sapphire, which they're all really nice. And above everything else, the sound quality is amazing on these earphones, which is arguably the most important thing about earphones, is that the sound quality is good, and these are incredible. So if you want to grab yourself a pair of Urbanista's London wireless earphones, they are very kindly offering you guys 25% off of your purchase plus free shipping. That's 25% off plus free shipping when you use my code at checkout, Eleanor25. The link is down below in the description. Thanks again to Urbanista for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into it. But quickly before I do, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about the murder of Chinx Drugz, real name Lionel Dufon Pickens, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to be referring to him as Chinx. Born on December 4th, 1983 in Queens, New York, Chinx's life started in the projects in Far Rockaway. This was an area with very high crime rates. So from a very young age, he was watching all of this go on around him, and it was very normalized to him to hear about another murder on the block or, you know, robberies going on around him. Chinx began rapping in junior high when he was around 13 years old. It started out just at lunchtime with his friends. They would just go back and forth kind of battle rapping. But Chinx was very passionate about it. He really enjoyed it. He really liked, you know, creating lyrics and things like that. And so when he was around 15, he started taking it a lot more seriously and started seriously writing music at home and stuff. He would invest whatever kind of money he could get into studio time and equipment and stuff like that to help him work on this passion that he'd found. He chose the name Chinx Drugz, Chinx spelt with an X and Drugz spelt with a Z, so Chinx Drugz. It was just a name that he'd always gone by since his mid-teens. He didn't really like his first name, Lionel, and so he was always just Chinx to his friends. The name Chinx originally came from a racial slur for Chinese people. Chinx said that he got it when an older girl on his block that used to kind of flirt with him gave him the nickname Chinx, or with a Y, because he used to smoke a lot of weed, and when you smoke a lot of weed, your eyes get really heavy, they're harder to open. However, he later said in an interview that he didn't like the background to that name anymore. Of course, it came from a racial slur, so he didn't want that anymore. And so he decided, because he was already known as Chinx, it was a little bit too far to completely change his name. He was going to change the meaning behind it. So while he was in jail at one point in his life, we'll get onto that in a second, but he decided to come up with an acronym for the name Chinx. So it became Coward-Hearted Individuals Never Exist. And it was always just a message for him and his supporters to just go for it. Just get what you want in life. Have confidence and have guts to do whatever you want to do. And then he put drugs with a Z on the end because he actually used to sell drugs when he was 14, 15 years old. And that was how he would make the money for his studio time and his new equipment and stuff. He was selling drugs from a very young age. Like I said, all of this was very normalized in that area that he came from. Him and all of his friends were just used to it. It was normal to see 14-year-olds involved in high-level crime like this. And he was actually selling drugs right up until 2009 when he met French Montana. And it was actually French Montana that told him to be careful with that, you know, focus more on the music so that you don't have to do that stuff anymore. Anyway, he was known as Chinx Drugz. I went on so many different tangents to be able to tell you that story, but that's because his name came from a lot of different areas of his life. So he was known as Chinx Drugz. However, towards the end of his career, he dropped the drugs and was just known as Chinx. Probably because having the word drugs in your name is not very brand friendly, you know? In his own words, he said Pepsi's not going to do anything with Chinx Drugz. So like it was going to stop a lot of his kind of sponsorships and brand relations, you know, he was really limiting what he could do. Anyway, around the age of 16, when Chinx began taking this all seriously, he gave himself the name Chinx Drugz. He met another kid with that same passion for hip-hop and rap that Chinx had, and this boy referred to himself as Stack Bundles. That was his rap name, Stack Bundles. And the two of them loved music and rapping so much, and they didn't know anyone else that really did, so they decided to come together and make music together, do it as a group. They set up a collective with a couple of other boys in the area, and this collective was known as Riot Squad, and they were all making music together in the early 2000s, and they actually started to gain a bit of traction in the New York area. It was nothing big, it was nothing huge, wasn't enough to kind of make a living off of, but they were starting to, you know, get known in those kind of New York circles. So in 2001, when Chinx was 17 years old, he's just starting to gain this buzz around his name. He met a girl named Janelle Caceres through a mutual friend. And as soon as he saw Janelle, he just thought she was so beautiful. He wanted to meet her. He wanted to know who that girl was. He actually saw Janelle and that mutual friend walking one day. He didn't go up and speak to them. However, when he got home, he messaged that friend and he was like, who was that girl you were with? She was beautiful. And so this friend relays the information to Janelle. She's like, oh, okay, my friend's interested in you. However, Janelle just wasn't that interested at the time. She was 15 years old, Chinx was 17, and she wasn't interested in meeting a boy that she didn't know, you know, she was focused on her schoolwork. However, after a couple of months, Janelle kept thinking about it. She didn't really know who Chinx was because, like I said, she hadn't spoken to him. But after a while, she went back to that mutual friend and she was like, you know that friend that was interested in me? Who is that? Like, what's his name? Like, tell me about him. So this mutual friend got Chinx and Janelle to meet up. They met up at one of their houses, and Janelle said that night they just stayed up talking for like 6 hours straight. That was the first time she'd ever met him, and they just opened up to each other so much. This was a connection that she'd never really felt before. And from that moment on, they were inseparable. They kind of knew that they were the one for each other, you know? Like, there was never one moment where Janelle doubted this man. Like, she knew that she liked this man and she wanted to be with him for as long as she could. The two of them quickly went on to start their own little family, and they had 2 children, 2 daughters. And, you know, everything was going so well for Chinx. However, in 2005, he was sent to jail for a mixture of offences. I couldn't actually pinpoint which ones. I know he was involved in a lot of things in his life, a lot of different crimes and whatever. He went to jail and had a lot of charges on his record. However, at this specific point, he was given 5 years, I believe, and he served 3 of them. And you can imagine he was very upset by this. He's just started a family. He's just found the love of his life. He's just started to create a name for himself in rapping. And now he's got to put all of that on pause for what he thought was going to be 5 years. So these are the most important years of his daughters' lives. They're so young. He's missing so much of that development. And with his career, once you've kind of gained a bit of a buzz, you need to stay on top of that. Otherwise, you're going to go irrelevant really quickly. And he kind of knew that. And he thought, well, this buzz still isn't going to be here when I'm out. But, you know, that's what happens when you commit serious crimes. You have to go to jail. You have to serve that kind of time. And, you know, he was his own worst enemy in that kind of aspect. He didn't want to go to jail. He didn't want time away from his family or his career, but he continued to commit all these crimes, you know. Like I said, he was given 5 years and only served 3 of them and was set to be released in 2008. However, a year before he was released, Chinx got a call in prison. And this was Chinx's family calling to inform him that his best friend, Stack Bundles, had been shot and killed in his own apartment building. And Chinx was now in his mid-20s, and this really affected him. This was his best friend. This was the man he worked with, the man he shared this passion for music with, the man that saw his vision. They saw each other's vision. They helped each other so much. His rock had been killed. And so when he was in prison, he was still serving time, he decided that he was going to give up music. He didn't want to do it without Stack. It didn't feel right. And he'd already had like 2 years off it anyway. And he just thought when he got out of prison, he was gonna move on with his life. He was gonna get a proper job and whatever. But when Chinx did get out of jail the following year, he realised that the whole time he'd been away, his best friend, Stack Bundles, had been promoting Chinx and his music and keeping his name relevant and current. He was putting Chinx's name in his songs. All of these new friends that Stack Bundles was meeting, because Stack was then like gaining more and more traction as Chinx was in jail, and it then kind of put them on an uneven playing field in terms of how many streams and stuff they were getting. Stack was now getting more than Chinx was because Chinx hadn't done anything in a while. And so Stack was going out, he was meeting other rappers, he was making friends and connections, networking, and that whole time he didn't have to do this, but he was telling all these new people about his best friend Chinx that was in jail, his best friend that also makes music and is going to be huge one day. Stack really believed in Chinx. He knew that as soon as Chinx was out of jail, he was going to do amazing things. He was going to be huge. He was so talented. He had so much potential in the rap game. And so Stack was kind of making this platform for his best friend. So then as soon as Chinx got out, he had this platform and he could go from there and continue making music. And so when Chinx got out of jail, he had so many people contacting him, all of Stack's friends that he'd made that Chinx had no idea even existed, but there were so many rappers that were contacting Chinx saying, oh my god, you're Stack's friend, I've heard so much about you, I'd love to work with you, I'd love to record with you, I'd love to meet you. And this led to Chinx getting back into music. Like I said, he planned to just kind of put that whole thing behind him and move on with his life, but he realised that his best friend had made this platform for him. He couldn't just throw it away. He couldn't just not use it. And so he began meeting all of Stack's friends that he'd made while Chinx was away. And these new friends included Max B, French Montana, when French Montana was still really small. He wasn't, you know, the big celebrity in the charts with all the streams that he is now. And together, Chinx, French Montana, and a couple of other rappers made the collective Coke Boys. Of course, Riot Squad wasn't a thing anymore. Stack Bundles was now gone, and Chinx didn't really want to continue in the same collective without his best friend. And so they made this new one. Meanwhile, in his personal life, Chinx proposed to and married his then girlfriend, now wife, Janelle, and she became Janelle Caceres Pickens. And the two of them had another child, a third child together, this time a boy. So now they had 2 girls and a boy, all of which were 14, 11, and just 4 years old when Chinx passed away. And it was around this time in 2009, so a year after he got out of jail, that he finally began recording and making music properly again. And he started out with 3 mixtapes, a trilogy of mixtapes named Hurry Up and Die. Over the next 5 years, Chinx released 12, I think, further mixtapes and EPs, a lot of which were very, very successful, most notably the Cocaine Riot mixtapes and the Coke Boys mixtapes. Things were going amazingly for Chinx. He was doing collaborations and songs with people like Rick Ross, Jadakiss, Jeremiah, DJ Khaled, Ty Dolla $ign, so many different people, and he was doing so well that in 2015 he was actually considered for the 2015 XXL freshman class, which, if you're into the hip-hop world, I'm sure you know what the XXL freshman class is. Basically, XXL is a huge magazine publication, kind of news outlet in hip-hop, and every year they have what is called the freshman class, which is about 10 up-and-coming rappers, hip-hop stars. Now they even include producers, I think, or at least they have new up-and-coming producers on the cyphers. And anyway, they choose these 10 different freshmen because they believe they're gonna go on to do amazing things. That is exactly what the freshman class is. And although Chinx didn't get in his freshman class, it's an honour to even be considered. In the 2015 class, there were people like Goldlink and Vince Staples, and Chinx's name was considered alongside those kind of people, so you know how much faith XXL had in him as an artist. So anyway, as Chinx was getting more and more famous, he was more and more popular, he began getting a lot of female attention, often from famous women as well. And despite him being married to his long-term girlfriend, now wife, Janelle, they had 3 kids together, they'd been together over a decade, you know, they were going so strong. Chinx began seeing other women behind Janelle's back. I'm not sure how many women in total Chinx did this with, and I'm not sure how serious each woman was as well. However, he was with Janelle all the way up until his death, so there's no way to know how many women he was doing this with and for how long he was doing this with. One of the women that Chinx was seeing outside of his marriage was Malika Haqq. Now, if you don't know who Malika Haqq is, she is Khloe Kardashian's best friend, or at least she was. I don't know if they still are now. So she was on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. That is like what she was best known for. She then went on to go on to UK's Big Brother, Celebrity Big Brother. Chinx was also kind of seeing Erica Mena for a while. She denies that they were ever an official thing. Erica Mena, another hip-hop artist, reality star, she was on Love and Hip Hop. Erica said that she and Chinx were just close friends, and you know, they did have a thing for each other, but out of respect for his marriage, his wife, they never kind of took that further. However, French Montana, in different interviews, he said that Chinx and Erica were definitely a thing at one point. Chinx was living what Erica described as a double life. You know, a lot of rappers do, where they'll have their family and their personal life at home. However, when they're on tour, when they're recording away from home, they'll be partying and seeing all these girls and whatever. Chinx, for the most part, tried to keep his family, his wife, his children a secret and out of the public eye. I think it was mutually decided between him and Janelle. First of all, because they have 3 children. They don't really want these 3 children growing up in the public eye. And second of all, because it's not very rapper to have a wife and 3 kids at home, is it really? I think a lot of it was for like image purposes, for his reputation. In the summer of 2015, Chinx was planning to release his first ever debut studio album, which was named Welcome to JFK. He'd released a lot of EPs and mixtapes before this, but never like a proper studio album. This was what he'd been working for so long. He was on tour on the West Coast with the Coke Boys, French Montana, the Coke Boys. It was all a joint tour, and he decided that before the album dropped, he was going to cut that tour short. He was going to go back home to New York and see his family. Partly because he missed his family and he wanted to see his wife and kids and whatever, but also mostly because he had a feeling that this album was going to be it for him. It was going to blow up, it was going to change his life, and then after that point, after that album went out, he was going to be so busy doing so many appearances and so many shows and so many tours that, you know, he just kind of wanted this time with his family before everything was about to change, so that he could see them, he could celebrate with them, whatever. So he was back in New York. He wasn't going to be there for too long because he actually had to go to Dubai at the end of the month to shoot a music video, and so he just wanted to spend this like 2 weeks with his family before everything blew up, because he knew things were about to change. On May 16th, 2015, 31-year-old Chinx was hosting a night at a nightclub. It was around midnight, so it was technically the 17th of May. So he was just about to leave his house, and before he did, he went into his wife, Janelle, who was getting ready for bed and whatever, and he said, look, do you want to come? Like, you can come. And she said that she was tired. She was pretty much falling asleep as she was talking to him, and Chinx was joking with her saying, oh, my baby's tired, like laughing at her. And she was like, no, you go, like, you don't want to be late. I'll just see you when you get back. So Chinx assured her that he wouldn't be home too late. Like, the club closed at 4 a.m, which is late. But he said that he wasn't going to go anywhere after that. He was just going to come straight home. So he would be home just after 4. So Chinx, his friends, and their security all left in all their different cars. And Chinx was driving because he didn't really plan on drinking too much. So, you know, he drove to this club. So they get there, Chinx performs, this party goes really well, everything's really good. And then after the club closes at 4, even though Chinx told Janelle he was just going to go straight home, I think him, his security, and this other friend tried to get into a few different places after the club closed, but nowhere was open. So at this point, it's clear that they're probably not going to get in anywhere else. So they decide to just call it a night and go home. So Chinx's security leave, and now it's just Chinx and his friend Altar Aziadi. So Chinx offered Aziadi a ride to the subway station in his Porsche, and so it was just the two of them in the car, and they're driving to this subway station when they stop at a red light, and a car pulls up alongside them. Out of nowhere, the occupants of this other car got out, ran to Chinx's car and began shooting inside, shooting Chinx at point blank range. Chinx was hit a total of 11 times. These bullets were clearly fired at him, and Altar Aziadi was hit by one of the bullets, although I don't believe that the shooter was aiming at him. He was just hit. The shooter then got back in the car and drove off before anyone could see anything. It was 4 a.m. anyway, so no one was really around, but Chinx was now in his car, unconscious, and left to die. Around 4:30, 5 a.m, so not even an hour after this happened, Janelle woke up and realised that Chinx wasn't in bed next to her. He said he was going to be home straight after the club. He wasn't going anywhere else. He still wasn't home, and so she began calling him, wondering where he was. However, he wasn't picking up the phone. Around 5 minutes later, Janelle receives a call from Chinx's manager, who is saying, have you heard from Chinx? Like, have you spoken to him? And she said, no, I've been trying to call him, but he's not answering. And it was then that the manager had to break the news of the shooting over the phone to Janelle. And the manager said, well, I've just been in contact with police. They said that Chinx has been involved in a shooting and they want to speak to you immediately. And so the manager gave Janelle a detective's phone number, and on the phone, detectives told Janelle to come down to the hospital straight away and to not come alone if she was driving. And as soon as she heard that, she knew that this wasn't good. So she rushes down to the hospital and she's waiting for over 3 hours, waiting for anyone to speak to her. And it was finally then that detectives called her into a room, sat her down and explained what had gone on. They said that Chinx had been shot when he was out that night, and paramedics were called to the scene. However, he was pronounced dead before he even reached the hospital. We can assume that he passed away quickly after the shots were fired, because 11 shots, it's very unlikely that anyone, it's practically impossible that anyone could survive that. So Janelle and Chinx's mother walked into a room where Chinx was laying on this hospital bed, and they had to identify his body. And Janelle says that the hospital staff had to practically drag her out of that room because she didn't want to leave him. She didn't want to leave the love of her life on that bed, knowing that that was the last time she would ever see him. Chinx's friend, who was in the car with him when he was attacked, 27-year-old Altar Aziadi, like I said, he was hit by one of these 11 bullets that was fired at Chinx, and it actually pierced Aziadi's lung. And he survived, but he was very lucky to. Aziadi later told Chinx's family and the news that he believed that Chinx was actually trying to protect him with his body, shield him with his body. Anyway, at this point in the case, police have arrived at the scene and they're examining this crime scene. And it was very clear that whoever had done this, whoever had killed Chinx, this was premeditated. They had been planning this attack. They'd waited until Chinx's car was out of the way of any security cameras, and in police's words, it was kind of boxed in, was Chinx's car, between like construction barriers, the sidewalk, you know, it was in traffic at a red light. The perpetrators must have followed Chinx's car until he got to a point where they knew that he wouldn't be able to escape and that cameras wouldn't be able to catch them, and that was when they attacked. Police believed that the assailant had been stalking Chinx's car for some time, just waiting for an opportunity like this one. So this looked like the killer was someone that Chinx knew, or at least someone that knew Chinx, whether it was like a personal matter with an enemy, or was it someone that just knew of Chinx, knew that he was a rapper with a lot of money, you know, there was probably money, phones, things like that in this car. However, there was no money stolen from the scene. Chinx still had his phone on him, things like that, like the car wasn't stolen. So robbery was low down on the list of motives that police had. It didn't seem like this was an attempted robbery. And because the shots were mainly fired at Chinx, well, all of them were fired at Chinx, none of them were intentionally fired at Aziadi. It seemed as though it was more of a personal matter. It was someone going looking for Chinx. So this was going to be a hard one for police to solve because, like I said, there was no security cameras in the area and there was no DNA left at the scene or anything like that because, of course, the shooter didn't come inside the car. They didn't touch the car. In the days following Chinx's death, Janelle had to try to explain to her 3 children, including a 4-year-old, their 4-year-old son, that their father was with God's angels and he wasn't coming back. And it was especially hard because now the world knew about Chinx's family. It was never fully a secret before, you know, like people knew of Janelle and the kids, but he wasn't posting it everywhere. If you weren't digging deep into Chinx's life as like a super fan, you probably wouldn't know. But now the world knew. And now there were news reporters, there were paparazzi outside of his home taking pictures of his children, of his grieving family. How is a family supposed to grieve when that's going on? Especially because to them and to his kids, Chinx wasn't, you know, this world famous rapper. He was just their dad. Meanwhile, the police investigation into Chinx's murder began, and they started out by sitting down with his friends, his family, his associates, his, you know, rapper friends, people like that, and asking them who might want to do this to Chinx, because it was clear that this was most likely the result of some personal beef that Chinx had with his killer. This was clearly a personal attack. This person that was doing this was angry. They had hunted him down, they'd stopped his car, and they had fired at just Chinx and not his passenger. But of course, a big rapper from Queens, New York, he had a lot of enemies, as did everyone else there, you know. There were a lot of people that he'd had beef with in the past, people that he was currently beefing with, and there were just so many people that it was impractical for police to be able to properly investigate each individual lead. So in an attempt to narrow it down, you know, narrow down their suspect list of all these people that Chinx was beefing with, police sat down with his passenger, Altar Aziadi, the man that was injured that night. And at first, Aziadi was very cooperative because he was a victim too. He wanted to find out who had injured him like this and murdered his best friend. He was going to all the questionings, he was telling them everything he could. He said that unfortunately he didn't catch the assailant's face because it was dark and, you know, it was all such a blur her that he never saw the person's face. So he couldn't be of much help to police. And from there, Aziadi stopped talking to the police. He stopped cooperating with them. He said that it was because he'd already told them everything that he could. You know, they couldn't possibly have any more questions about that night. He told them everything that he could. So he just stopped going to interviews. He just stopped speaking with them. And a lot of people in the beginning of this case thought that was very suspicious of Aziadi. Why would you not want to do everything you can possibly do on your end to make sure that your friend's killer is caught and they get justice, you know? And some people believed at the time that potentially Aziadi could have been involved in this somehow. Now, police knew that it wasn't him that shot Chinx and, you know, injured himself. It was, you know, physically impossible. The way that the bullets entered Chinx, police didn't think that, but that doesn't mean he wasn't involved. Maybe he was affiliated with the shooter and put himself in that position to be alone with Chinx that night. There was always the possibility that maybe Aziadi was sat in that passenger seat next to Chinx, texting Chinx's soon-to-be murderer with updates, telling them where they were. You know, maybe he was part of this. Maybe he was with Chinx that night to help his killer. Aziadi now works in his parents' deli shop part-time, and he doesn't have a lot of money. He's not doing the music stuff anymore. He was never really big in the music stuff, and a lot of people that believed this theory at the time believed that maybe it was for a money motive. Maybe Aziadi was being paid off by Chinx's killers to help them in this. This theory really doesn't have much evidence, any evidence really, supporting it other than the fact that, you know, the circumstances, the timing, he was the only person in the car that wasn't shot at, you know? There was only him and Chinx in the car, and he accidentally got hit by a bullet. He wasn't fired at. So police were still trying to search any other lines of inquiry, any other leads, but they had very minimal leads. Not much was coming in because this was a culture where snitching can cost people their lives. You know, there's always snitches get stitches kind of rules in cultures and communities like this. It was unlikely that police, if there were any witnesses or anyone that knew anything, it was unlikely that police were ever going to hear anything from them because they were scared of losing their own lives. This could also be a factor as to why Aziadi stopped going to his police interviews, because maybe he did know something. Maybe he did see something. Maybe he did see the killer's face, but he was too scared to tell police because that might cost him his own life one day. So police continued their investigation, but meanwhile in Chinx's career, his label, his team, had been left with his debut album. It wasn't completely finished, but it was pretty much there. He'd recorded everything he needed to. It just kind of needed mixing and finalising at that point. And so Janelle and a bunch of Chinx's friends stepped up and helped his label and his whole team finish this album in the way that they think Chinx would have wanted it. Welcome to JFK was released on June 2nd, 2015, so just over 2 weeks after his murders. And it actually reached number 21 on the US album charts, which is amazing in itself. But it also reached number 2 on the rap album charts and the R&B album charts, which is even better. The album did amazingly well, and his family were so happy, and they were celebrating for him. They were enjoying that for him, but there was always that sadness deep down inside that he never got to see how well his work was being received, how well his album did. And Janelle in particular was very heartbroken about this. This was something that Chinx had been working towards his whole career. The whole time that he'd known Janelle, he'd been rapping, he'd been working up to the point where he was going to make his debut studio album, and he never got to see the fruits of his labour come into fruition when that album dropped. And it was around this time after his death that the media found out and began reporting about how Chinx was cheating on his wife and that he had all these other girlfriends, and he'd even gotten one of these other girlfriends pregnant which was true. The media framed it like it was some huge scandal, which I suppose is true, but the truth behind it was that Janelle already knew. She'd found out while Chinx was still alive. Chinx had come to her and told her that this had happened, and they were dealing with it as a married couple, and you know, this woman was going to keep her baby. Her name was Trisha. I don't know too much about her. I don't know too much about her relationship with Chinx, but Janelle knew about it, and they were all working together to do this in a way that was, you know, going to benefit all of them. Not so much benefit all of them, but in a way that was going to be comfortable and mature and respectful, and that everyone was happy. Like, yes, Janelle was upset and she felt betrayed by Chinx, but what was more important to her in her heart was that this baby, Trisha's and Chinx's baby, was innocent. That baby had done nothing. That baby hadn't betrayed her. And that baby deserved love and a family, and it deserved everyone in this situation to be mature about it and make sure that this child gets the best possible life it can. Trisha ended up having a baby boy named Liam, and Janelle and all three of her children to Chinx all attended the baby shower. Janelle even posted on Instagram, "What the world thought was breaking news or drama, we already knew months ago, and me, you and him were handling it privately and respectfully." It was all very mature how they were handling this. It was clear that everyone in this situation just wanted the best for this baby, and they were all supporting each other, especially now that Chinx was gone. The two women grew closer. There were also rumours around this time that Chinx had gotten another woman pregnant, a stripper named Larima Davis. However, I couldn't find too much past like 2015 about those claims. There were pretty much no news articles, so I don't think that was true. Regardless, back to the police investigation. Months and months were going by. Police were doing everything they could. They were exhausting every avenue, every possible way that they could go with this investigation, even though it was unearthing some quite uncomfortable things for his family, like his previous girlfriends and hookups outside of his marriage. Police spent weeks, months scouring through everyone's social media that was relatively close to Chinx to try to find any kind of clues there. They did hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews of people that were associated with him in some way, but still nothing. I mean, the interview process in this case was very hard for police. A lot of people didn't want to be seen as snitches. They didn't want to betray anyone. They didn't want to cause any issues. So a lot of people actually avoided questioning altogether. However, the people that did go for interviews still didn't really tell police much. It's actually a huge thing. It's referred to in this case and many other cases as the hip-hop code of silence. And this has been pinpointed as the biggest issue, the biggest hindrance in this case. Had that not been a thing, and had police just been able to interview anyone and everyone with full honesty and transparency, then this case could have been solved so much quicker. For almost 2 years, Chinx's murder case remained unsolved. And people were starting to worry that this case was never going to get solved. Police were doing everything they could behind the scenes, but to the public and to Chinx's fans, it seemed that nothing was happening. There were no developments, even though, of course, there probably were small developments, but police were just keeping them to themselves. A lot of his fans and a lot of people in the kind of hip-hop world did have this huge fear that this case was never going to get solved, because it is actually quite common for rappers' murders to go unsolved. I heard a quote from the editor-in-chief of XXL magazine, that magazine that we were talking about earlier, and she said that there'd been almost 70 murdered rappers in the last 30 years, and most of those cases were still unsolved. To this day, they're still unsolved. And a huge reason for this is that hip-hop code of silence, that kind of street code of not snitching on anyone, being scared to kind of tell police anything. Also, there's just the general hatred of police and the fear of police as well in these communities. Now, one of the main theories that was speculated by both fans and police was that maybe Chinx's murder was related to the murder of Stack Bundles, his best friend, all those years ago. And Stack's murder still, I believe to this day, is still unsolved. So there's still that same worry that these people that killed Stack might now be feeling even more confident and even more willing to kill someone else because they'd gotten away with the first one. So maybe they came back for Chinx. So police decided to dig back into Chinx's life all the way back to like 2007, 2008, 2009 kind of time when he was friends with Stack Bundles, just in case this was like someone that knew both Chinx and Stack. And they found that while Chinx was in prison on Rikers Island in like 2007, that time when he was away for 3 years, they found that he had a brief run-in with another inmate in that prison named Quincy Homer. Quincy was also a very small rapper at the time. He was trying to make it for years under the name Quality spelt with a W, and he was still, when police were investigating this case, he was still trying to make it as a rapper in 2015-16 kind of time, and he wasn't successful. And due to the lack of musical success that he was having, Quincy had resorted to a lot of crime in order to make money, in order to survive. He would rob people, he would, he was very involved in all of that kind of stuff. And because of the lack of musical success, Quincy had resorted to a life of crime. He was still trying to make it work as a rapper, but he was also robbing banks, breaking into people's homes. The most recent of which, when police were working on this case, was in November of 2015. So, like 6 months after Chinx's murder. And in that November, 32-year-old Quincy robbed a bank and stole upwards of $400,000 and was caught for it. At the time that police were looking into this line of inquiry, Quincy was actually still in jail for that. He also had a very violent past and present, to be fair. He was known as just a very violent person. He'd beaten people within an inch of their life before. He owned guns. He was known for owning guns. He even rapped about the specific model of gun that was used to kill Chinx in one of Quincy's songs. So it's not looking good for Quincy. He was just a very dangerous person, and he spent time on Rikers Island, which is one of the most violent prisons in the whole of the US. And now, as police were digging into Quincy Homer, they found out that he had had a physical fight with Chinx on Rikers Island in 2009. And after this physical fight, Quincy had told the prison guards that Chinx was the one that gave him all of the injuries. He snitched on Chinx. And, the men got over this fight quite quickly, especially Chinx. However, from that point on, Quincy had snitched on Chinx, and so nothing was ever going to be the same again. And Chinx was going to make sure that everyone knew that Quincy was a snitch, because no one in these kind of communities wants to be friends with a snitch. Basically, the men didn't like each other after this. However, Chinx was always the victor of this. He'd not only won the fight, but he'd also made everyone in that prison hate Quincy for being a snitch. And so Quincy held a lot of resentment for Chinx for that. It gave Quincy a really bad reputation in prison. It made no one want to hang out with him, And this one physical fight with Chinx ruined Quincy's whole life for that amount of years that he was on Rikers Island. And then when Chinx got out of jail, Quincy Homer had to watch this man that ruined his reputation in jail be successful. He had to watch Chinx gaining traction, meeting people like French Montana and Jadakiss and Jeremiah and Ty Dolla $ign, collabing with them, getting thousands and thousands of streams, being this huge celebrity. And what was Quincy doing? Still trying to make it as a rapper, but being really unsuccessful. Yet this man that ruined his life is doing it 10 times better than he ever will. And now, police discovered that Chinx and Quincy Homer had yet another run-in in 2015. So just a couple of months before Chinx was killed. They were at a party in Miami, and Chinx was there with all of his, famous rapper friends, French Montana, Uncle Murder. There were other people there as well. And Quincy Homer was trying to be friends with all of these big rappers. But Chinx had told all of his friends, French Montana, all of those kind of people, that Quincy was a snitch and that they shouldn't associate themselves with him because he's a liability, he might snitch on them one day. And so no one wanted to speak to Quincy at this party. Not only did they have their loyalties to Chinx instead of Quincy, they also just didn't want to associate with anyone like that, because these rappers, they do a lot of things, you know. They have these double lives. They don't want a snitch in their crew. And so they made Quincy feel ostracized at this party. And that only made Quincy's hatred for Chinx boil over. Maybe it was a combination of hatred and jealousy. Jealousy that Chinx has got everything that Quincy has ever wanted, but Quincy just can't get it because Chinx also ruined his reputation, ruined his chance of ever getting that. And maybe Quincy was so angry and so upset that all of this came to a head in 2015 when Chinx was back home in New York. Maybe Quincy got word that Chinx was back in New York and decided that now was his time, that he was going to get rid of Chinx. Chinx had actually posted his location on his Instagram story that night when he was at that club, so it's likely that maybe Quincy was just waiting for his opportunity to find out where Chinx was. So as police looked more and more into this theory, they found another suspect that could have also been involved. 26-year-old Jamar Hill. Again, Jamar Hill was a very serious criminal that had spent a large percentage of his adult life in prison for violent crimes. And while police believed that there was only one shooter in this case, there was only one person that fired those shots at Chinx, they were also pretty certain that there'd been a getaway driver as well, some kind of accomplice, and Jamar Hill was Quincy Homer's right-hand man. So police decided to use a technique that is called dumping a cell phone tower, where they can kind of look at a cell phone tower in a particular area and see every single phone that connected to that cell phone tower in a particular time frame. Every single time you go on your phone, like even just to unlock it, or, you know, someone sends you a text, your phone refreshes in some kind of way, it bounces off a cell tower. So you can imagine how many times a minute your phone is bouncing off your local cell tower. It doesn't even have to be when you're sending or receiving a message. It can be, I'm not too familiar with it, but it can be very little things, just like something refreshing. And so usually this is a technique that is practically impossible to use because there's too many people on their cell phones at one time, you know? Literally hundreds of thousands of signals will be going between these cell towers every single hour, if not millions. I don't actually know how many, but it's a lot. It's practically an impossible task to look through these records in a case like this. Police would never do it. However, this murder took place at 4 a.m. So maybe it is doable. Not as many people are going to be on their phones. It was still going to be a huge, huge task to go through these records, but it's doable with some time and a lot of officers. And so they got to work looking through these records, and within a few days, they found Quincy Homer and Jamar Hill on those records. They were in the area of the shooting around 4 a.m. that morning. And that was the final piece of evidence that police needed. They'd been collecting all these smaller pieces of evidence, like the fact that Quincy mentioned having and owning and using the same model of gun that was used to kill Chinx, you know, smaller things like that, but of course that doesn't prove that he's the killer. However, this huge piece of evidence, along with all of those smaller ones, meant that police could finally arrest Quincy Homer and Jamar Hill on suspicion of the murder of Lionel Chinx Pickens. It was quite easy for police to locate and arrest both men because they were both in prison at the time of this case. Quincy for his bank robbery and Jamar for something else. So they were charged with not only the murder of Chinx, but also possession of firearms and a bunch of other charges relating to that case, including previous charges actually that they'd managed to avoid the police from. They were charged with those as well, and they were just all stacking up on top of each other. Police believed that specifically Quincy Homer was the killer. He was the one that got out of the car and fired these shots at Chinx, killing him. And Jamar Hill was his getaway driver, his accomplice, and they'd both stayed silent all these years. They were both given a murder charge, even though police knew pretty much that Jamar didn't fire the gun. I don't actually know why they were both given the exact same charge. I mean, he did enable Quincy to murder Chinx by giving him the car. They probably both planned it together. It was just Quincy that got out of the car and fired the shots, you know? This murder was a team effort between both of those men, and so both of them were sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, and they're still there now. Chinx's family, his friends, his rapper friends, his associates, his fans, still to this day keep his memory alive, both in the form of his music, but also in the form of his message to just be confident and go out and get what you want, because life is so short. And if you don't go and get it, someone else will. But that is all I have on this case for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks again to Urbanista for sponsoring this video. If you want to get 25% off of their London earphones plus free shipping, make sure you're using my code ELEANOR25. The link is down below in the description. Huge thank you to all of my channel members for helping me decide the cases that I cover, especially my tier 2 members whose names are all on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can just click the join button on a desktop, or there'll be a link in the description of this video. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below because that really helps me out. If you want to subscribe, there's a link right here. If you want to subscribe to my second channel, there's a link right here. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, there's a playlist on screen right now. Bye!